Thank you, Stephen. I have a self-introduction here, so I'll quickly talk through it. I apologise for the size of the words on this slide. It's the smallest words on any of them. So I'm interested in the nature of the sustainable perspective, the sustainable lens that practitioners in all fields bring to their work and how this can be applied in disciplines with great societal leverage, and in particular education and computing, and the intersection of those two being computing education, and in particular computing education for sustainability. I was asked to give a talk at the Wanaka Film Festival this year, and I was overseas or something, and I didn't really pay much attention to what they decided for me as the title. And they decided that the title was going to be How Little Things Make a Big Difference. And then I came back and I was about to give that talk, and I thought, I was up all night thinking about this talk, because I couldn't possibly give a talk with a title that I disagreed with. And so I was so worried, I didn't know what I was going to do. How was I supposed to stand up in front of several hundred people and give a talk that I didn't agree with? And the reason for that is that I firmly believe that the little things that we do, all the things that we do need to do, we need to be changing the light bulbs, we need to be organising our recycling and so on, but they just don't add up. They're not enough to get us to the system change that we need. So what do we do about this? And here's the brainwave that I had in the middle of the night in Wanaka. Little things do multiply, and they multiply to create positive system change. And that's what we need to be looking for. We need to be looking for the things that will positively affect others and the things that will create system change. Those are the little things that we can do that will make a difference, and that's what I want to talk about. So, as I do a radio show each week on Otago Access Radio with Shane Gallagher, who apologises for not being here today. We've now interviewed 250 have gone to air. We've got about 300 ready to run. People that we've talked to for about an hour about what does it mean to be a sustainable practitioner. What is it that they are doing that we can look back and say, or we can identify and say, that's a particular thing that we can all learn from. What is it that they're actually doing? In my real job, I run the third-year projects in the Bachelor of Information Technology. And because it's me that's running them, they have a particular sustainability bent to that. I wonder if this is a pointer. No. And so we do a whole range of different projects. So we've done projects on carbon counting. We've done a project for the, several projects in fact, for the aquarium. We've done a project for the City Council on trying to work out how to engage people in thinking about long-term energy availability. You know that the energy strategy is out for consultation at the moment. And there are statements in that about what percentage of the energy we're going to have available to us in 2050 or something. What impact is that going to have? What's the relationship between that and decisions that they're making about whether or not to allow suburban development or infill development? How do we actually take the community with us in those sorts of discussions? So we did some modelling on that. We've done several games trying to engage people in sustainability. We did a project for the museum on trying to get people engaged in the place, telling the story of the place. Place is a really important part of the sustainability message. And this is a project that we did for the Peace Foundation on conflict resolution. All of these things fit into a sustainability message. All of these things are things which I would argue are things that are those little things that multiply. These are things that create positive change and are about trying to create systems change. We're going to come back to those. And as Stephen said, this is the book that I wrote a couple of years ago, which tells the history of sustainability through its diagrams, through the diagrams of sustainability. And this is the Green Graduate book, which tells the story of what Otago Polytechnic has done in terms of sustainability. So we set off in 2007. We convinced first the leadership team and then the chief executive and then the council that the Otago Polytech should adopt a policy that every graduate may think and act as a sustainable practitioner. You can see that I've said that several times because it was my job to make that happen. And so from 2007 until last year when they decided to make it a leadership team responsibility, that was my job to make that happen. And so we set off with the goal of saying, what does this mean? What does it mean to have every graduate thinking and acting as a sustainable practitioner? And how do we make that work for the midwives and for the engineers and the computing people and the whoever else? We decided not to focus on having a particular school of sustainable practice, although we did that as well. What we really wanted to go for was every graduate. We wanted to make sure that everybody was there. And the key thing was this thing in the middle, was this thing in the pink here, thinking and acting as a sustainable practitioner. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a sustainable practitioner in any of those disciplines? And so that set me off on changed my career in terms of my research direction into what that is. I should say my research direction, I'm really a geographer. I'm masquerading in computing. One day they'll find out. And so this wasn't too much of a stretch for me. And when I got that BB fellowship, I got interviewed by about 7 different media organisations in the same afternoon. And every single one of them, their first question was, but you're the computing guy. What are you doing sustainability? And for the first half of them, I answered, oh, it's okay, I used to be a botanist. And because they didn't understand what biogeographers were. And about halfway through I realised, no, that's the wrong thing to say. This stuff matters for the engineers and the midwives and the computing people as much as it does for the botanists. In fact, probably more. And so we thought, should we write down a list, should we write down a checklist of these are the things that all of our graduates need to be able to do? And in fact, we had a go at it. And it was not a sensible thing to be doing, because the list that we came up with was just not worth it, because we had to make it to make it apply to the engineers and the midwives. It had to be so generic it wasn't worth reading. And so what we thought about was actually the process of thinking about what it means to be a sustainable practitioner. That's the journey we want the students to go on, not for us to say, here is the list, make sure you do those things. And we started seeing this in terms of what we referred to as a sustainable lens. And so we saw this in terms of the sustainable lens, the lens being the notion that developing your professional lens is the purpose of education. Other purposes of education, but that's one of the outcomes of education, is that you're able to see the world as a doctor or as an architect or whatever it is. So instead of just seeing the world as here's a pretty hill, you're looking at it and seeing that extra special thing or extra special things that your discipline training has for it. And what we need people to be doing is to be adding a sustainable lens to that. And so what is that sustainable lens becomes a question. And that's a question that we can engage the students on. We can actually engage people in thinking about what does that mean. So you can think about this yourself. You can think about going and looking at a particular place, a particular favoured view, or even a particular not favoured view, or even inside of an office or a bus or whatever else it might be, and ask yourself, if I turn on my sustainable lens, and if you into augmented reality superhero type things, you can actually put glasses on and pretend to be turning it on if you like, or you can just think it, I won't mind. Turn on the sustainable lens. What is it that we're seeing that's different to what we were seeing before? Because that's what we need the students to be able to do. And importantly for this talk, that's where we're going to get those little things that make a difference from. So what is it that we're going to be looking for is the question. And just to reinforce that, it now says that here. I've forgotten that I'd put that on there. So here's what we're not talking about. Here's the things that we're not going to get us to those little things. For a long time, the effort has been in information and persuasion. The notion that if we tell people, give people all the facts, people are going to say, oh, of course, that's a silly thing to be doing. I shall stop driving my car and start riding the bike. Because, of course, and we all know that that's worked so well for smoking. No, it hasn't worked well for smoking. The kids think that the gory pictures on the back of the cigarette packets are really awesome, and it's not making much of a difference. You still need to do it, don't get me wrong, you still need to be doing that stuff, but it's not going to change the behaviours and make the big difference that we hope it will. Neither is it green bling. Green bling is the stuff that you do about sustainability because it looks good. It's bling as in jewellery. And the easiest way to think about this is if you do things like put solar panels on the house before you address things like the insulation on the house. Because the insulation on the house will have a much bigger impact than the solar panels, but no one can see the fact that you've put insulation in the roof. And so if you're doing it if you're doing it for show, then it's probably not where we want to be putting the effort. Assuaging sustainability is just the stuff we do to make ourselves feel a bit better. It's not really going to make a difference, but it makes you feel a bit better. Probably not worth doing. I've put environmental sustainability in there. The book, the Sustainable Lens book that I wrote, is all about how the notion that the Venn diagram version of sustainability, the one with the 3 circles, some of the Olympic rings, the bit with sustainability just in the middle, is not a good model of sustainability. And the reason it's not a good model of sustainability is it's too easy to pull the bits apart and start referring to environmental sustainability or economic sustainability or social sustainability. They only make sense when you're talking about all of those things together. So if we are going to be talking, and that's referred to as the pillars model, if you are going to be referring to a pillars model, then we want to use this version of it, the bullseye version of it. This is Daly's strong sustainability model. So we want to try and avoid having environmental sustainability, and we'll talk about in a minute about what we should do instead. We also need to be careful to avoid what Susan Crumdyke refers to as green myths. These are the things that we think are just out around the corner. Just around the corner, we're all going to be driving electric cars, so it doesn't matter, we might as well invest in roads and put roads everywhere, because soon we're going to be driving green cars, and that's going to solve everything for us. And she talks about how those things are green myths, that they may or may not happen, but at the moment, we're just using them as an excuse to carry on doing what we're doing. And so we're trying to pretend that everything's okay, we can carry on not changing. And so if our definition of sustainability is about us carrying on doing what we're doing and not changing, then it's probably not working for us. Incidentally, this is, I'm going to have to say his name, Hans Brunix, who is the Director General of the European Environment Agency, who I talked to last month, who says that the pillars model, the sustainable, the Venn diagram version, he describes that as intellectual nonsense. Yes! I was very pleased to have him say that, and I've been quoting him liberally since then. So here is a long version of one of my favourite definitions of sustainability. Shall I read it out? I'll read it out. As a society, we have to learn to live in a complex world of interdependent systems with high uncertainties and multiple legitimate interests. These complex and evolving systems require a new way of thinking about risk, uncertainty, ambiguity, and ignorance. These systems require that we can think simultaneously of drivers and impacts of our actions across scales and barriers of space-time, culture, species, and disciplinary boundaries. See, that is one of my favourite definitions of sustainability, and you'll note that it doesn't mention anything about polar bears, it doesn't mention anything about penguins or anything of that sort of stuff. This is about systems. This is about integrated systems and how we need to get better at thinking in systems ways. And it leads to, as we'll talk about in a bit, things like multiple legitimate interests. These are things like wicked problems. These are the sorts of things that is the real challenge of sustainability. If sustainability was just a matter of changing the light bulbs, we would have done this already. In fact, Naomi Oreskes says that the fact that we solved the ozone hole so easily is actually doing us a disservice now, because it was actually just a simple, substitution of chemicals, we got away with doing that. Sustainability and climate change is so much more complicated, but we've kind of got this, oh yeah, we know we can do that, we did that before. And it turns out that it's not that easy. Here's my shorter definition of sustainability. Sustainability is ethics extended in space and time. We'll come back to that definition in a bit. And here's my even shorter definition of sustainability. And here, I've only really started using this one in the last couple of months, but it's really working for me as a definition or as a thing that we're doing. Socio-ecological transformation. I've stolen this from the Swedish, who call it social ecological transformation, but I'm a native English speaker, so I'm allowed to do more to the language than they are. And I think breaking it to socio makes it harder to split off. The danger of thinking about it separately is that you can then start thinking about social transformation. But what it really is saying is that we need to be treating the social and the ecological as if they're one, and that's where we need to be focusing, and that it's about a change. It's not about carrying on doing what we're doing now. And I think, again, this starts to point us towards where we look for those little things that are going to be making a difference. It's things that are actually getting us towards change. What are the things that we can find that actually are about promoting leverage, about getting us to tipping points? Those are the things that we want to be looking for. So, I work in computing, and computing presents itself as big as nice, shiny appliances, information appliances that have opened up the world for us. There is no denying that they are fantastic. If you just look at the impact of the web, how much that has changed everything. But we need to remember that these are really industrial plants in disguise. This is the amount of energy that goes into one of these things is quite considerable. We'll look at that in just a tick. How can we use computing to make a difference? I'm sure we remember Microsoft Clippy. It didn't last very long because it annoyed everybody so much. You may remember, it pops up and says, it looks like you're writing a letter. I know, I'm writing a letter. That's why I wrote Dear John. And it wasn't particularly helpful. And it got in the way. And one of the first rules of human-computer interaction is to not get in the way of the work that people are trying to do. And so we don't want to, but here's the challenge. We do want people to change what they're doing. Because what they're doing is having a party while the earth burns. And so we do need to do that. So how do we do that? How do we get in the way? How do we get behavior change without being annoying? We don't want to be Microsoft Clippy. If we work out how much embodied energy there is in a computer, a laptop such as this one, nice, shiny, in fact this one's real heavy, it's probably more, it turns out to be about 400 grams of coal per day, equivalent, energy equivalent. That's quite a lot. I did do this experiment in my old office in D Block of the Polytech. It's quite a lot of smoke. If you burn that much smoke and burn that much coal in your office over the period of a day, it's really smoky. You don't want to do it. If our computers emitted that much smoke, we would be pretty clever. We would build chimneys to get rid of that smoke, make it somebody else's problem. But that's not the point. The point is, what would it be if it was virtual smoke? If it wasn't actually producing that much smoke that we could get rid of, but it was just the smoke that hung around in front of our eyes. It would be really, really annoying how much smoke that is. And that's one way that one of the things that we can do is try and visualize, try and think about what is the impact of what we are doing. If we look at that much, if we look at how much smoke that is, or put it back into sensible terms, if we look at the computing's contribution to anthropogenic emissions, it's 2% of global emissions is attributed to the IT industry. And I kind of think 2%, whew, that's hardly anything really. Everyone's got a computer, it's not that bad. But it is the same as the airline industry. And we're also desperately worried about the airline industry. We're also desperately worried about air miles and what's that impact, should we be going to Europe next year because we can't, the air miles are too terrible and all that sort of stuff. Computing is just as bad. So, the footprint of computing, and I'm just using computing as an example, I'm hoping that you're thinking about the things that are around you and the things that you use, is terrible. We need to address it. We need to work out ways of reducing that. And there are things that we can do to reduce the footprint of computing. And we can put that in terms of this metaphor. So here's a metaphor which we'll talk about this woodsman. And we can identify this person that's going to be working in the forest, and you have to pretend at this point that when I said chainsaw to the artist, they actually drew a chainsaw and not an axe. So we can work with this, let's say it's a student, we're training them how to be a good forester. We can look at the things that are going to reduce the impact of their work, reduce their footprint. So in this terms, what we can say is that we can focus on recycling the oil from the chainsaw. And we can focus on sharpening the teeth on the chainsaw, rather than just putting a new set of teeth on every time they get blunt. So those would be things, those are the skills that we can say, yep, these are things that we need to be doing. So we can all do that. We can all think about our own lives and think about, yep, these are the things that I can do to reduce my footprint. And we certainly need to be doing those, and most of us are doing lots of those, and we're helped by the systems we do have around us. Not so much Dunedin's public transport system, but for things like the recycling system. They've got quite a lot of that sort of stuff in place for us to use. And as we go about our lives, if we think about our sustainable lens, remember, put them on, turn them on, we can start to think about seeing the opportunities to do that. We can start to be thinking about, there's an opportunity that I can reduce this. There's an opportunity that I can do that. And of course, we're used to hearing about the footprint, but equally important is the handprint. And the handprint is the impact that we can have, the positive impact that we can have. So footprint is our negative impact, and our handprint is our positive impact. If we look at the impact of computing, just to give it some concrete, so remember how I said this was over here 2% of anthropogenic emissions. If we look at computing's potential to do good, and it's a small part of sustainability, and we don't want to be too technocentric in our solutions, but just bear with me for a moment, it's variously estimated that computing's potential to reduce total anthropogenic emissions, depending on who you listen to, somewhere between 20 and 40% could be reduced through computing. And this is not like me making up these numbers. This is the European Union making up these numbers and the US Department of Energy numbers. So these are pretty strong numbers, that computing's potential to reduce things. So kind of to scale, we need to be working on this. I don't want to skip past this. We need to be working on our footprint, but the much bigger impact, the much bigger impact that we can have, the much bigger change that we can make is by focusing on the good that we can do. So how can we identify areas that are going to work for good? And so this starts to get into behaviours. This starts to get into, how are we going to make this work? Our woodsman, and again I want you to be thinking about what it is that you do in your lives, we know that this woodsman knows these behaviours. We know that they know about using the recycling the oil, sharpening the teeth. We've got that bit ticked off. And we can certify him sustainable and that sort of stuff. But what's really going to matter is what happens on his first day of the job when he's busily doing those things, recycling the oil, sharpening the teeth, and the boss comes up and says, stop mucking about. Chuck the oil in the river. Slap a new set of teeth on that chainsaw. Let's just get on with this job. What do we expect them to do then? And this is the big question that we have for students. This is what are you going to do now? How are you going to make that work? And these are the behaviours that are actually going to make a difference. Yep, we certainly need to do those footprint things, but it's actually about being able to put those things into practice where it really starts to matter. And as soon as we start talking about behaviours and different alternatives about what you do in that situation, then we start to get into multiple values, into multiple understandings, and into wicked problems. This is Cherry's trolley problem. Again, you have to pretend that the artist that I had draw these knew what a trolley was, and when I said it's like a train, didn't then just draw a train. So it's called the trolley problem, so you have to imagine it's a tram. And so there's a train racing down this track, and what do you know? There is 3 people tied to that track. It's an ethical dilemma set up, so you're not allowed to say, why are they tied to the track? Can I go and untie them? No, you can't. But you are standing there beside the switch, that you can divert the train down onto this other track. What do you do? And this is a good way to get students thinking about ethics. Because you can play with their heads. Because, well, maybe I'd pull that switch and send it down there. Well, does it make a difference if that is your grandmother? Well, probably it would. Does it matter if these people are about to win the Nobel Peace Prize? And you pretty quickly can push them to the edge of utilitarian ethics on that kind of thinking. But the reason why we sort of start talking about that is why that we start talking about sustainability being ethics expanded in time and space is that these are not we're trying to get people to think about the hard stuff. It's not just about the easy bits. It's actually about how do we make progress on the harder work on that. And those of you that are doctors will know that there's the fat boy variation of the trolley problem is that instead of the siding that's going to save the train but kill the person, you're standing on a bridge with a really, really fat person, and you can push them off in front of the train. They'll get mangled, but it'll save the people. And that's the difference between, can you kill somebody to get at their organs? No, you can't. But can you harvest organs from a recently dead person? Yes, you can. So these kind of things stand up. Why am I telling you this? Because we can extend it in space and time. Okay, let's add to this a third alternative where we're going to divert the train. What do? Well, we'll divert the train into the forest. Yeah, sorry, forest, you're a goner. But let's say we put into that forest, well, they're already there, the last 2 remaining orangutan. And they're a boy orangutan and a girl orangutan, and they like each other. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And these are the sorts of things. Now, we are not in the position of making decisions quite like this. But if we start to be thinking about the fact that the decisions that we're making as a community are at that kind of level, then it starts to get us to the sorts of thinking that we need to be doing in terms of expanding our thinking in terms of time and space. And if we can accept that we might divert the train to, would we kill off a person to save the last 2 orangutan? Well, what happens if it wasn't so cute? What happens if it's not a charismatic megafauna? If it's a bit of an ugly worm? Would we, how does it work on that? How do we make those sorts of decisions? And then there's another alternative, And I think this is the real crux of sustainability, and I think it's underworked. And that is intergenerational equity. This is what it's really about. When we start talking about the environment for its own sake, but also it's about leaving the world a better place and so on. So let's have we get rid of the orangutan, and we send them down this track. There's nobody tied to it at the moment, and it's got some kind of space-time roller coaster loop. And the train is going to disappear off down that track for 10 years. And in 10 years' time, it's going to kill an unknown number of people, somewhere between 1 and 1,000. What do we do? Now, I've given this talk quite a few times, and every time I do it, I think, there's this little voice in the back of my head that says, yeah, do that one. And that's just weird. Why would I risk 3 people or somewhere between lots of people? What difference does this 10 years thing make? It's not that it's going to be somebody else, because in 10 years' time, it's really the same people that are going to be there. We're really, really hopeless at thinking across scales. So how can we do that? How can we put around the council table people who are actually thinking about our decisions in 10, 20, 50 years' time? How can we get to that kind of position is what sustainability is really about. So we're quite good at thinking about actions and responses. We're quite good at thinking about, if I push down on this ball, it's going to pop back up again, or whatever the actions might be. We're hopeless at changing scale. We're hopeless at saying, where did this ball come from? What were the conditions of the people that made this ball? We're hopeless at seeing the stuff that's around us. We're actually hopeless at seeing the stuff we can't see. And even the sort of the metaphorical, the stuff we pretend we can't see. We're really not very good at doing those. So in terms of little things that we can do that make a difference, it can be about helping people see things across scales of space, time, culture, and so on. Back to the forester. It's still a chainsaw. What's he going to do? So he's got through the first day and he is busily doing the recycling and all the stuff we want him to do. What's he going to do on the second day of work when his boss comes and says, I want you to go and chop down that big tree over there. And it's the last kauri tree. The very last kauri tree, and he's been told, go and chop that down. So we've got some questions in there. One of them is, would he notice? Would he know that it's the last kauri tree? Second question, what's he going to do about it? What's going to be the response to that situation? Now, we can think about the same things for ourselves. We can think about, what is the equivalent of the last kauri tree for us? It might in fact be the last kauri tree, if you're into the chopping trees down. But what is the line that you're going to say, I'm not prepared to cross that? That for me is a big deal. I'm not going to do that. So here's a little thing that you can do to make a difference. Think about, what are those lines that you're not going to cross? And then the next big question is, would you know? Would you know that that's a line that you're not prepared to cross? So you might say, I'm not prepared to buy anything that's produced in a slave shop in Cambodia. So if that is a line that you say you're not prepared to cross, the next thing that you have to do is work out how you're going to find out. How are you going to know that the stuff you're buying for cheap, because that's how our system is set up, is being produced in that way? Now here's the real trick. Nobody's going to be told to chop down the last kauri tree. But he might be told to chop down the 999th calorie tree or the 998th calorie tree. So it's unlikely that you buying this ball is going to kill a slave child in Cambodia. I was in Cambodia last week. I'm allowed to talk about Cambodia. But together, the decisions that we're all making might. And so this becomes a tragedy of the commons problem, that we do need to all act together in the decisions that we're making in order to make these sorts of decisions. Used to use this example, and I've used this example for the architecture and engineering school when we first started talking about this, and they said, Sam, we need to clarify. On the building site, you do what you are told. You're not in a position to, as the sustainable practitioner, whatever that means, they thought they were funny, you're not allowed to say, now, it doesn't make sense, it's not sustainable for us to build this house out of concrete, we're going to build it out of straw instead. Because you're right that somebody at that point is going to die if you make that kind of decision. Therefore, sustainability doesn't apply to the building site, was the line that they were going for. But I think it does, and the example, or the clue is in this image here, that what does apply on the building site. In every Western economy, and most of the others as well, there are rules that say, health and safety legislation that says, that if you are instructed to go and climb up a ladder which is about to fall down, you are required to say no. In fact, it goes past that. It says, if you're about to see somebody else climb up a ladder that's about to fall down, you're required to intervene. You're not allowed to think, oh, this is going to be good, I'll get my phone out and I'll put it on YouTube. That's not the deal. The deal of our societies is that when those risk events happen, you're required to intervene. So the rule, the blanket rule that on a building site you'll do what you're told, isn't actually a real rule. The real rule is that you focus on that safety is the rule. Now, remember what I keep saying about sustainability being ethics extended in space and time. This is the same thing. We need to be in the position of extending that health and safety ethos that we have to longer timescales. Yes, it might not be killing somebody right in front of us. It's not a ladder that's going to fall down, but these decisions that we're making are hurting people in Cambodia or might be hurting people in 10 or 20 years' time. Lots of these ideas, there's lots of different places where we could talk at length about different things. I'll skip past some of these. The Earth being a spaceship was a significant change. The notion that we're finite resources, and before that, people were explicitly saying, there was a quote that I found from the 50s that somebody said, the Earth is like a great warehouse of old, and every time we run out of resources, we find new doors. And so this idea that Earth is a spaceship, and was added to that we're all crew, was a significant change that we made. The different spatial scales is something important. The ideas that these are wicked problems that are only going to be solved if we talk them through. What is it that we're trying to do? What we are trying to do is to find systems things. We're trying to find the tipping points in systems. We're trying to find the things that are going to scale, and we're trying to do that by finding the areas that are going to make a difference. One of the questions is, how many people do we need to take with us? Skip Latner, who used to be the Secretary of Energy in the US, talks about the transition from 90% petrol-driven transport, sorry, the other way around, 90% horse-drawn transport to 90% petrol-driven transport. And it was ridiculously quick, like 6 or 7 years of how long that transition took. How many people do we actually need to take with us to get past tipping points to actually make a difference? How many electric cars do we need to have in order for us to all of a sudden go from the next car that you buy is going to be an electric one? What sort of systems do we need to put in place? We don't have solid answers for those, but we know that that's where we should be looking. We know that we need to be looking for how do we get to tipping points and how do we actually get over those tipping points. Just like the New Zealand dollar getting to 99.9% US, well, it wasn't US, it was Australian, wasn't it? And then we chickened out and backed off. Somehow we need to say, no, these are the tipping points. We're aiming for tipping points. We're aiming for things that are going to make a difference. This is some work that, that my students did. She's gone, that's my mum. So students working with the Peace Foundation. If we can get into primary schools, get conflict resolution into primary schools, that is an area where we can make a significant difference. This is some work that we're doing at the moment. What we're doing is trying to work out how can we engage people? How can we, given that just more and more information is not making much of a difference, what are the things that we can do that actually engage people in really thinking about stuff and actually wanting to be involved in politics? What's it going to take to get us all to write letters to the editor that are actually going to sort of sway the ODT into thinking positively about cycleways, for example? And from my perspective, how can I, as a computing person, what can I do that will not just, I could write a letter myself, but for me, the more important thing is to get more people to write a letter. So how can I focus on what it is that I can what I can do? And just quickly talking about the need for integration, and then we'll stop for a cup of tea. This is some work that we did a couple of years ago, on what we called SIMPAR, which we were teaching Maori kids how to write computer games. Why were we doing that? It's because there was too many kids at home playing on their PlayStations when they should be at school. How could we re-engage them in the culture? And Internal Affairs paid us quite a lot of money to do this. And so we developed a system of teaching people how to write computer games and going out and doing that. And then we went out and did it, and it looked nothing like we expected it to do. But what we produced was a whole pile of capability things about developing. None of them made computer games, but they did make lots of other stuff with what they want to do. And I'll finish on this slide now, on the next one, and then we'll finish off after a drink. This is a movie that we're making at the moment. We've got funding to do this. So we've got funding to make a movie about Otago Polytechnic's approach to education for sustainability. It's only a short movie. They're paying us to make a 10-minute movie. So we're not doing that. What we're doing instead is making a movie about mountain biking. Actually, we are. We're making a mountain biking movie because we know that if we make a movie about Otago Polytechnic's approach to education for sustainability, 3 people will watch it. If we can make a nice movie about mountain biking, we've got a chance of it being shown on university and polytech campuses around the country. And so what it is we've got a story that some students from outdoor leadership are taking some students from other disciplines, from nursing and, what's the other one from? Engineering and one from IT, on a mountain biking trip around Dunedin to look at sustainability issues. And so that's the story we're telling. It's a nice metaphor. But here's the twist. So we're making this 10-minute movie. What we're also making is 5 more 10-minute movies, because we're gluttons for punishment. But these are animated overlays. So these are going to run on top of the original movie as showing diagrams and things, pointing stuff out, highlighting different things. And these are the sustainable lenses. So these are running, what we're going to be running is systems thinking, embodied resources, so that's things like embodied energy, things like nitrogen, mercury, anything, if you look at the planetary boundary stuff, all of those sorts of things about things running out, how do we show what we're consuming? One for place, which is carrying the heritage and the natural, cultural, including sort of family relationships here. So it could be, this is a place where it's nice to have picnics. What we think is that the idea of place is really important. How do we expect people to look after stuff if they don't value where they are? First and foremost, look after where you are, and you're not going to do that if you don't care about it. Then a future-focused one, and so that's looking at the opportunities that we have for making things better. So it's things like, as we cycle past through a suburb, we're going to draw on top of all the houses, all of the places where we could put solar panels. And as we're going down the road, here is places where we could put cycleways and so on. So these are differences that we can make. And then the fifth one is wicked problems. And the wicked problems is about us trying to say, actually, this is quite hard. We don't have the answers here. If it was easy as changing the light bulbs, we would have fixed this problem already. And so what that means is that it's about multiple legitimate interests. It's about the fact that I might value a forest because it's for its intrinsic value. I'm a botanist after all. I like just the fact that there are trees. Other people value the wood. Other people might value it for recreation, for going mountain biking, and so on. How do we bring those things together? Those are some of the big questions of sustainability. And so, but that last one is doing the wicked problem. So people will then watch the movie and then watch it again, setting the sliders. So I might look at it and say, for me, systems thinking, I don't care about that. We'll make that 5%. Embodied resources, that's quite important. We'll make that 40. Place and heritage, that's quite important. I'll make that 40 as well. Careful, make this add up. Future focus, that's quite important too. I'll make that 20. If I run out of numbers for wicked problems, and whatever it is for wicked problems, that's my view of sustainability. And so one of the things that the little things that you can do, and the starting places for that, is to start thinking about, as I'm walking around, how do I look at this? What am I looking at differently? Can I turn on my sustainable lens? Does it make a difference? And also, we're certain to have missed stuff. So you might think, hang on, he's missed family. Well, okay, imagine a family one. Okay, so as I walk around, how do I integrate family? What would I see differently if I'm thinking about my family relationships on here? I might be thinking about my children or grandchildren. You might walk around and say, what's this? In what I'm seeing in front of me, what's this going to look like in 50 years? How might they be perceiving things? Because if you can then start getting that vision, whether it's a good vision or a bad vision, you can then start saying, okay, how can I help that? How can I help them get there? How can I help get from now to that position of either where I want to be, or if you've thought about it negatively, how can I avoid getting to that place I didn't want to be? So just to recap, the notion of the sustainable lens is that you can go to any place and think, can I turn on my sustainable lens? Can I turn on thinking about this in a sustainable manner? And what is it that we will see? And so we've talked about the different things that we'll do, the opportunities for reducing your own impact, the behaviours that it's going to take to actually put those into place. But while we need to do those, probably even more important are the opportunities to do good. You will have noticed along the right-hand side of my slides have been quotes from some of the people that we've had on Sustainable Lens in the last year or so. As I say, there's 250 people online. And Shane, who's not here today, are halfway through writing a book which we're calling Tomorrow's Heroes. And the premise of Tomorrow's Heroes is a bit of a response to the film The Age of Stupid. I don't know if any of you saw the film The Age of Stupid. It was produced by Lizzie Gillett from Dunedin, now in Camden. And the premise of that book the premise of that movie was to be looking back from 2050. Pete Postlethwaite in a post-apocalypse environment, looking back through the old archives, saying, how do we get ourselves into this mess? And what we wanted to do was to look forward in a positive frame. What we wanted to do was look forward to say, here are some people who we think are doing good stuff. We think that in 20, 50 years' time, people are going to look back and say, you know what, I'm really glad that those people did that stuff. And so the reason for us doing that is for us to be able to say, well, what is it that they're doing, and how can we do more of it, please? We're a little bit uncertain about the notion of the hero implying that it's something that some sort of super special person does. But one of the things about sustainable, one of the things that about sustainable superpowers is that they're not about being invisible or running faster than a train or stopping bullets. These are things that we can actually, all of us do. So although it's about the hero, these are things that we can all do in order to be heroes. And so when you weren't listening to me and you were wondering what else to be thinking about, hopefully you've been diverted by the people on the right-hand side who have been talking about the work that they are doing and what inspires them, and so on. So these sustainable superpowers and these little things that can make a difference that I keep talking about, we can see as actions that promote positive system change. And these then are the chapter headings for the Tomorrow's Heroes book. And all of these, and so how we're doing it is we're introducing a person. This is the work that they're doing. This is what their background is. The first question we always ask is, where did you grow up? What did you want to be when you grew up? And that disarms people because they think we're going to be asking difficult questions. And then we sneak in the difficult questions later on. These are things that we can all do. These are things that people are doing that are making a difference. And so these are things that we can be particularly focused on as our little things that we can do that make a difference. So look out for that book, which is going to appear sometime when Shane actually turns up and we get that written. So I urge you to do go and look through the people that we've interviewed on sustainablelens.org. They're podcasts that you can easily download and listen to. If you just press play, they'll play. And for the ones that we've done in the last 18 months, I'm not going to say they're full transcripts, but we have been trying to take some notes on what people have been saying. I've been pestered by an ex-student of mine, who runs the Caption-It website and movement and complains a lot if I put something up without a transcript. So we've been trying to focus on those transcripts. So this, if you like, is the punchline of these are the superpowers. These are the little things that you can do that make a difference. And I want to finish with a series that we did recently. I've made them smaller now, you can't read them. That was clever, Samuel. These are a series of interviews that we did all in one day in Oamaru. And we went to Oamaru because my daughter, who's about to finish her geography degree, went there for her third year project. She pointedly didn't do geography because she knew that that's what I did. And then she accidentally found herself sitting in geography lectures because her boyfriend was doing geography. Discovered that she liked it, and we went out for lunch, and she said, "Dad, I've got a confession to make." Oh dear, what's this going to be about? Turns out I do like geography. I was only not doing it because you did it. Anyway, so they came back raving about all these people that they'd met in Oamaru. So the next weekend, Shane and I went up and set ourselves up in the studio in Oamaru and interviewed the people in Oamaru. I think that the transition town movement is something that we can look at provides us quite some inspiration. This is people that are doing stuff. This is people that are having fun. This is people. The premise of the transition town movement is that even if all of this sustainability, all of this unsustainability stuff doesn't come to pass, then we've made the world a better place. This is a demonstrating that it doesn't have to be a lesser life, it can be a better life, and let's get in and do that. And the reason why it's sustainability stuff, if we look at this one here, which is Marion Shaw runs the Resource Recovery Park in Oamaru. And they're diverting something like, I've forgotten what it is, 70% of rubbish from the landfill. But, as she says here, what we're really doing is resource recovery of people. We just happen to be using the waste stream. And I think that's a really good example of the integrative nature of what we call sustainability. If we go back to that definition, the one that I said I like, the socio-ecological transformation, that's a really nice model of things that we can say, this is not ticking all the boxes, but this is a good demonstration of things operating in all of those systems. Apparently it's black over on the right-hand side. So I urge you to go and have a look at Sustainable Lens, either sustainablelens.org or find it on Facebook. I'll leave that one up because I think that the work that they're doing is quite inspiring.